Morning. It's always interesting when we have a prescribed thing to talk about. As you know, we're doing the Advent wreath, and so it has peace. And I don't know about you, but it's a weird time to be focusing on peace, right? But the one thing we have, I think I've learned in trying to prepare for this is that if you want to be peaceful, you need to be of service. And I just want to thank the people who contributed to the angel tree. The angel tree, as you know, there are children who've been displaced from their families by the courts, and often they have very little at Christmas, and so people have come together. About 900 people get something during this time in Wake County, and we did 30, but we then also took in so much more. Then for those 30, we did 9 more that came in. So we did a good job here. I think it's just part of the whole process of being at peace is to shift from yourself to something else. And if you think about it, that might be the major shift that it takes to be at peace. Given that there's always going to be conflicts, there are always going to be, conflict doesn't necessarily mean it has to be unpeaceful. It means that two people want two different things. And so there is conflict. But when it's all about you, and for me it's been most of my life, so I'm not really, when it's all about you, then when it doesn't work out, then the ability to hold on to your peace is so much less, isn't it? I mean, if the whole idea is, can I keep this ego of mine satisfied? Can I keep my emotions not erupting? And can my body get everything I'd ever wanted when it wants it? If that's the whole of it, there's a really good chance it's not going to work. It just doesn't work out that way. That, you know, you had that maybe in your womb, but you don't have that when you're out walking around. There are times when you don't have what you want, and there are times where people will be wanting something different than you want, and there will be times when it actually you don't feel good. That's it. But do you need to lose your peace? The external is one thing. The internal is something else. And while we cannot wholly, completely control the external, our internal is for us to manage to learn to really be the master of. And the way to do that is actually, in some degrees, to learn to master the outer. And by that, I mean the way you act, not the way the world acts, the way we act. So if I'm in the practice of being selfish or self-centered, and I act out of that self-centeredness, there's a really good chance that my quota of self-control internally will have been diminished, or at least not grown. I was talking with a friend yesterday who's 72 years old and is riding his mountain bike, and I said, so an old man riding a bike. He goes, I don't see one. We were talking about the necessity for managing his intake. He said, you know, if I eat late, or if I have something to drink late at night, or I wake up in the morning, I feel terrible. It's just not worth it. That as he's gotten older, there's no margin. There's a balance. As you do over here, you lose over there, and as you lose over here, you gain over here. And that's the way it is physically. That we don't have unlimited amount of pleasure open to us. Pleasure only goes so far, and then it begins to be a problem. And so it is with doing just what you want to do. Doing just what you want to do is good. It works for a while. It works somewhat. It can be satisfying, quite satisfying at times. But if that becomes the steady diet, the steady activity of your outer life, then what happens is that it becomes less and less satisfying. It becomes finally to where it doesn't feel good at all. Doing just what you want to do is not the real solution to happiness. It's pretty strange, unless you have a more advanced way of thinking about it than selfishness. You can do exactly what you want to do when you have shifted your goal toward being of service. As you begin to expand who it is you care about and what you are doing your activity, what and why you're doing your activity, then what you do can be selfish in a really wise way. It's like eating good food is selfish. Sleeping the right amount of time is selfish. Not harming another is selfish in its own way because it makes you feel better. And when the baseline of our feeling state is being satisfied, the ability to be in a state of peace is so much higher. But when we are irritated because we have been wearing out our welcome by doing just what we want to do, while we have been completely focused on ourselves, then the baseline becomes irritated. The baseline is not happy. And so when something comes along, it gets to be too much, and we lose our peace. Now, it's not the end of the world, usually, to lose your peace. It happens to everyone. But the progress we make in shifting our needs from being all about us to being of service to others, as we shift our needs in that way, we begin to expand our baseline of happiness. And then when the external world is not in agreement with where we wanted it to be, it is far less difficult for us to maintain our peace. We have reserves. There actually are margins. And we can have things not go our way and we can still be at peace. And this is one of the great lessons that the Peace Pilgrim, I think I've talked to you about her before. The Peace Pilgrim started in 1953, taking a walk. And she had nothing except what she had in her small pockets. And she walked for 25,000 miles in 28 years. And along the way, she thought it was her job to ask nothing of anyone else, but to speak to others about how they might attain peace. And the reason she took this up is she had been about 15 years trying to establish a baseline of peace within herself. And one of the first things she said you have to do if you want to develop a baseline of peace within yourself is to give up negative emotions. Now, many of us think we have the right to be angry, that it is our choice. We don't always have choice, but if we are mad, we are right to be mad. We are justified to be mad. If we are sad, we are justified to be sad. If we are afraid, we are justified to be afraid. And if you are at that level, that is really true. But if you want to have permanent peace, that is no longer a given. That you must learn to manage your emotions. And that managing your emotions is part of the steps toward peace. But without those, you don't really develop the capacity to handle things. You don't have to have the emotion just because it arises. It may come for a while. Give it 30 seconds. But don't give it the next 30 seconds if you can. Help it. And don't make a story to go with it that justifies why you have that. And then, this is my favorite, rehearse that story long after the event has happened, right? feed it, nurture it. Whoa. I'm mad because this week has been one of those weeks for me which I have been mad, period. Just straight across. Nothing would dissuade me from saying the story inside my head. I didn't say it out loud very much, a little bit, but I ran that tape over and over. And I stayed mad all week. Right? Congratulations. Who can maintain an attitude here? I can. The story, I like to describe it as fuel. So you have a fire, the emotion, whatever it is. And when you tell the story, you put another log on the fire. And if you wish to dissipate an emotion, the fastest way I have found for very strong emotions to dissipate it is to stop telling the story and feel the feeling that you're feeling. Now, the feelings that we have a certain amount of energy to them. You have generated it by the event and your thoughts about the event. And they have a certain amount of energy, and if you will feel it, you consume that energy. But on the other hand, if you tell a story, you just put another log on the fire. So then you have more to consume. And finally, it may dawn on you that telling the story is the problem, right? How many people had something happen to them in their childhood? And looking at this audience, that was not yesterday. And they tell it to themselves today with emotion. And it affects them today. And they think, to some degree, and at one level of consciousness it is true, I have the right to hold on to this because it was done unto me and I'm never forgetting. And at one level of consciousness, you're absolutely right. And if you are there, that's where you are. But at another level, it's ridiculous to do that. It hurts you over and over. The person hurt you once, but you've hurt yourself many more times. And that's a hard teaching for many of us to hear. And so we're not there. And it is not true that I can control that. But when we do get there, through whatever method of releasing that, then we have a much freer life. And so I think part of the pathway to peace is forgiveness. That instead of being right or holding on to a story, we release it. And it doesn't mean, in all clarity, it does not mean that we are justifying that what they did was right, or that's the way it should have been, or it was my fault, or any of that, but we release it. And the release may take some effort, because sometimes we say, I want to forgive, and we can't yet. But there's something about the human spirit that when we set the intention to release and we give it our best shot, then something kicks in. And it may not happen immediately, and it may not happen as fast or thoroughly as we want it first, but if we continue to stop telling the story, stop feeding the fire, stop making it worse, and continue to intend to forgive, it will happen. And we will be the lighter for it. And though the harm really was real and it really did happen and it really shouldn't have happened and all those things. But when we release it, then we become free. And we build this margin inside us that allows us to have more negative things happen or more conflict happen without disturbing our peace, because at the bottom, at the base where we really reside, we are at peace. And so forgiveness becomes one of those foundational things we have to do if we wish to be at peace. So here's how to do it. If you don't have a method, stop telling the story. Right up, straight across. Don't out loud it. Don't to yourself. Don't do it. And then sit in a place where you feel safe with the time that you can give to it. Say 20 minutes. And feel the feelings. This is for big ones, not for little ones. You don't need that much time for little ones. Feel it for 20 minutes, and it may not all go away. Maybe only 50% went away the first time. But if you stop telling the story, you're halfway there. And then you go back and you sit and you feel, you start the story, you go, I remember when she did this, which is all it takes to fire up the emotion, and then stop. And then feel the feelings that arise from that for 20 minutes or until they stop. Now you're down to 15%. Next time you want to practice, start the story, stop. Feel the feelings, and over time, and generally relatively quickly, it will change, and it will be just a story without the feelings. And if you don't start telling it again, that'll be it. Check. So that's a way to begin to build a baseline for peace. The second way is to release your attachments. You know how we get attached to things. Outcomes, for sure. Sometimes to things. Sometimes to people. How they think about us, right? You ever get attached to how people think about you? Oh. I tried that one on for a few years. In particular, we're really worrying about what people were thinking about me in a particular setting, in a particular way. And I think that's as detrimental to your mental health as anything. Suddenly, you're no longer free. You're no longer artful in a conversation with them either. You can't be artful because now you care about what they think. Exactly, you're attached. Not just care about it, you just need them to be thinking of you in a certain way. And can you get to a place of, oh, well, that's interesting from there? No, hell no. You have got to fix it, or take offense, or move into a deeper, harsher way of responding. You can't be light about it because you're attached to it. So, part of building the baseline of peace is to release your attachment to what other people think about you or anything else you're particularly attached to. If you need to win at the game, that ain't gonna help. Right? Unless you play as a sport. If you can't play it as a sport, then it's lost its sportness. Anything else you're particularly attached to? Your stuff? Your level of success? Those attachments diminish your level of margin for being at peace. One more thing. We've covered it, but I'm going to put it in this category again. Stop being selfish. In other words, release the need to be the center of everything you did, that it is all about you. If we can release that more and more, we will have more and more room to feel at peace with whatever happens, because we have found our way into the flow of nature. You know, most of us by this time have found a method for us contributing to the world, but this is fundamental for each of us, is to find a way to be of service. And it doesn't mean you have to have a job or be recognized as that, but you make your life about serving the whole. I had a friend who said he used to drive in traffic to work, and he would play the game of how can I get the most cars to get there the quickest. Now, many of us play the game, how can I get my car there the quickest? But he was trying to play a different game. And imagine how much more curious and fun and how much less likely to be frustrating if you're playing, how can I get the whole of traffic to move? Right? Now, if you think about that and extrapolate it into every area of life, wouldn't it be great if everybody could, you go to a party and go, how can I make everybody at this party feel good about themselves? Rather than how can I make myself tell the best cocktail story, right? And that shift of emphasis to all of us rather than to just me is liberating. And it also builds a baseline for your peace. Now, the world is composed of people. And if you think your peace is not important, then it would seem to say that, you know, the building blocks of success are not important, just the outcome. But I don't think that is true. Each person coming to be more peaceful is the beginning of a world that is more peaceful. And while we, fortunately, are living in a country that has not had civil war in a long time and has not been invaded in a long time, we should be like the most peaceful people you've ever seen. Living in a continent that's separated from the rest of the world, we should be very much at ease. We should be less fearful. We should have probably less weapons. We should have fewer enterprises that take the national capital to build a war machine. We should have less of those since we are so isolated, right? You would think, maybe. But we as a country are not very peaceful in our hearts. A lot of people die from murder. A lot of people commit suicide. It's not as peaceful as it should be. So to think that your peace does not matter would be a major, major mistake. Because at least your peace will affect your neighbor, and your neighbor's peace will affect their neighbor. And so as we are peaceful, we begin to build a peaceful world. So the practice of selflessness or being of service, the controlling of our emotions, and the process of kindness to others as a practice is building the conditions, raising the marginal energy for peace in our world. And it is my hope that rather than worrying about what's happening across the on another continent, some other place, and letting it disturb us, we practice these techniques for creating deeper peace within ourselves, and that making the conditions for peace within our country. And if you're a follower of recent 20th century and 21st century history, you'll know if there's peace in the United States, that's a good thing for the world. So let us be at peace. And let us pray. One thing that's always good with developing peace is learning how to quiet the mind. And the simplest and quickest way to do that many have found, is to simply pay attention to the breathing as though it was vitally important. Just simply watching the breath stops the mind from wandering, telling stories, calms the emotions, and sets the conditions for peace to sneak back in. So let us pay attention to our breathing. Feeling the breath. And the mind will wander, but bring it back. And sometimes when you're in a conversation that is getting more tense, bringing your attention back to your breath will keep you in a state of peace. And sometimes when you're watching the television and you're seeing horrible things, bringing your attention to your breath as you watch will bring you greater sense of peace. And sometimes when you can't sleep, paying attention to your breathing will give you the peace you need. So let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with us. And so it is. Amen.